The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlooker should laugh at him and say, "This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king, advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of the Lord. So today we celebrate the feast of St. Charles Borromeo, a very important person in church history. One of the most notorious reformers in church history. St. Charles Borromeo, he was made a cardinal when he was only 21 years old. Now, what were you doing when you were 21 years old? He was made a cardinal when he was only 21. And I used to think about that and think, man, he must have just been remarkable and very holy. Well, it turns out that the reason he was made a cardinal is because the Pope was his uncle. And so he was made a pope when he was 21. He was made cardinal when he was 21. He wasn't even a priest yet. He was ordained a few years later. And that's kind of eye-opening for who St. Charles Borromeo was. Gives you an idea of the time period he lived in. So he was born just after the Protestant Reformation. So Martin Luther and all his critiques, and then the other reformers, and St. Charles Borromeo came on the scene. And he was born into obviously a well-to-do family. In those days, oftentimes, bishops and popes and abbots, you weren't so much selected because of your holiness, but because of your qualifications or connections, right? And so that's one of the really inspiring things about St. Charles Borromeo, is he was instrumental in changing that, right? That's not how it is anymore. Martin Luther had some very valid critiques of the Catholic Church in his day. He was a Catholic monk and a Catholic priest. And he saw that there was holiness lacking in the leaders of the church. Oftentimes there was a greater emphasis on administration than on personal holiness. And we've all heard stories of some of the scandalous bishops and popes of that time. St. Charles, because he was a bishop and a cardinal, he was able to participate in what was called the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent is one of the greatest things that ever happened in church history. In our modern age, sometimes the Council of Trent gets a bad rap. If you've ever taken some formal theology classes, when I was in seminary, for example, the Council of Trent was kind of poo-pooed on in many different ways. I think the Council of Trent actually saved the church in various aspects. It is because of the Council of Trent that there were many great reforms. For example, after the Council of Trent, seminaries were invented. There were no seminaries before the Council of Trent. People who wanted to be a bishop or a priest, they just found a bishop to ordain them. You didn't have to go through a very serious training. You found a mentor and you were ushered in. That's probably part of the reason why so many of the Protestant reformers were very convincing when they would debate with people, because they were debating against priests who really hadn't been formed theologically, and they hadn't been formed spiritually. So St. Charles was instrumental in bringing about some of those changes. Another thing I think is inspiring about St. Charles is that before the Council of Trent, it was not a requirement for bishops to live in their diocese. Again, you became a bishop more so because of connections you had. And so if you had some really nice estate in another diocese, you didn't want to have to leave that behind and move away and move to the actual diocese where you were the bishop. So sometimes there were dioceses that, even though they had a bishop in name, they didn't really have a bishop in practice. So St. Charles, being a young man, very well-to-do, after the Council of Trent, after this rule changed, he was one of the first people. He sold his entire estate and he gave it to the poor, and he moved to the Diocese of Milan, which is where he was named the bishop and cardinal. Very courageous in this. Now, I think St. Charles is a relevant person for our church today. I think we're struggling with some of the same things that he struggled with. For example, I think if you ask people, what is the main responsibility of a bishop or of a pastor? Sometimes people will say, well, they need to be like a good CEO. They need to be a good administrator, right? People tell me all the time that priests in seminary, we need to have more classes on finances and administration and all these different things. And I think that's a legitimate suggestion, but I also think it's missing something. Our priests should be primarily pastors, not primarily administrators and CEOs. I think this is actually something that's good about our diocesan plan for Uniting in Heart, which I know there's various opinions about our diocesan plan, but it seems to me that that's one of the main goals of Uniting in Heart. It's trying to transition us from having priests be the CEOs and the administrators and arranging our staffs and our committees and councils in such a way that the priest can just be a priest, be a shepherd, and focused on preaching. Let me give you an example. How many times have you heard our bishop preach a homily? How many times have you interacted with the bishop face to face? Not very often. Because in some ways our church is structured so that he's more of an administrator. Now, that's not a blast against him. That's just in general in the church today. I think he's trying to make that transition. But I think that's a helpful example. I also think another thing that St. Charles is helpful for us is that in his day, again, Martin Luther's main critique is he was critiquing a certain cultural Catholicism in which Catholics just did things because it's how they had always done it. They were just simply traditions. But there wasn't actually a true personal desire for holiness. Again, how often do we see that in our church today? So many Catholics who come to Mass week after week because it's an obligation. And they do the Friday fast and Lent. And they tithe. But is there a real personal conversion there? Is there a personal prayer life? Is there a personal knowledge of the Scriptures, the faith? Is there an intentional desire to evangelize? I think we are in great need, just as in the day of St. Charles Borromeo, I think we are in great need of reform in our church, with a greater emphasis on personal holiness, personal conversion, knowledge of the faith. So let us ask for the prayers of St. Charles Borromeo, that God might send great reformers and spirit of conversion upon our church.